Well, Lamar, it's been a long time since we actually managed to get together to speak. And I know that you're always busy, but you got the college season coming up. And what are your thoughts on this coming season? And maybe reflecting back on last year, who do you see as being the teams that are going to make a difference, or players that are going to make a difference?
Well, Anthony, as you know, last year UConn won the championship. I do not see that happening again this year because they lost the guy who was arguably the best player in college basketball last year, Shabazz Napier. And it's not the best player in all of college basketball because I really like Doug McDermott at Creighton. Shabazz was one of the most clutch players. And without him, I don't see them repeating. But I think one thing we saw last year is a trend we've been seeing for probably the last decade almost is a lot of low-major, mid-major programs catching up to some of the high-major programs.
Yeah.
In terms of competition, and on any given night, some of the best teams can get beat. But also what we're seeing is a hierarchy at the top 3 to 5 positions, maybe more the top 3 in terms of teams getting set. You have Kentucky coming in this year.
Yep.
Probably the most talented roster in the country. They're saying they have 9 guys who may be first-round draft picks. And then you have Arizona out on the west, along with a program like Gonzaga out on the west, that pretty much control West Coast basketball. You look down in the southeast, Florida basketball's been really good. And then in the Big Ten Conference, Wisconsin has kind of reemerged as one of those teams that can be a consistent Final Four contender, at least in the very near future. Outside of that, even your Kansases and your North Carolinas, you expect them to be really good, but maybe not necessarily great. And I think that's kind of what we're seeing. So I think that will make for a very interesting college season where we'll see a lot of the teams that are ranked early on get it knocked off. And people will have their eyes on Arizona and Kentucky to see when's the first time they get knocked off, if they do at all before the tournament.
Yeah. Were there any teams that you can think of from last season who suffered due to injuries or suspensions that you feel will come back this year and be dominant?
I'll go straight to the Pac-12 with that. Colorado suffered an injury with their point guard Spencer Dinwiddie, and could make the case it derailed them a bit because they had a legitimate chance at finishing in the top 3 in the Pac-12.
Right.
I don't think they would have necessarily challenged Arizona because of how good Arizona was. I think Arizona was a little better than people even expected, which is saying a lot because people expected them to win the conference.
Yeah.
But Colorado could have been right there. So they're a team that without Spencer, he doesn't come back this year, but they were able to play without him last year and get used to that. They'll have the same roster coming back. But now let's go to Arizona, who was undefeated until a night when they played at California, and their small forward / power forward, Brandon Ashley, got injured, and that's when they suffered their first loss.
Right.
And so you can make the case that they would have gone undefeated if he had never gotten hurt. They didn't lose a lot of games. I think they lost 5 games total all of last year, including their loss in the NCAA tournament. So without Brandon Ashley, there's a legit chance that they don't lose. So they get him back this year. Some people are thinking they'll be stronger this year than they were last year.
Yeah.
I don't know that they'll go that far to say that, but I think they'll be right there.
Right. Any coaching changes that have happened that you think will have a big impact this year?
Well, one that was close to home was Oregon State. Craig Robinson was relieved of his duties, and Wayne Tinkle from Montana came in, and he's the new coach at Oregon State. I don't necessarily think they'll have a big impact in terms of wins and losses this season, just because the roster is pretty depleted. But on the recruiting trail, they just had a recruiting class that was rated in the top 10 in the country in many prognosticators' diagnoses, so to speak. And Oregon State's never had that kind of thing. They never had a top recruiting class. Not that I know of. I don't even know if Gary Payton's class was considered a top 10 class. Okay. And if it was, that might have been the only one, outside of maybe basketball way back in the 60s and 70s. And I don't think they were doing top classes then. So you kind of get the significance of what he was able to come in and do right away. Really outside of that, California had a coaching change. Mike Montgomery is no longer going to be there. Quanzo Martin will be the new coach. I'm not sure that Quanzo will come in and necessarily have a better season right off the bat than Mike Montgomery had.
Okay.
I think the only way that he would is if they make the tournament, because Cal didn't make the tournament last year. They made the NIT. Those are big shoes to fill for him. But I think he will succeed at Cal. And another one that may make some noise is at the Washington State. Ernie Kent is now the coach. He used to be the former coach for the Oregon Ducks.
Right, yeah.
And was my colleague at the Pac-12 Network for the last 2 years. He has replaced Ken Bone at Washington State. And I think that will be a positive. Not that I don't think Ken Bone was a good coach. I think Ken Bone did a lot of things good. I just think for a place like Pullman, a program that's struggling, trying to make some noise, Ernie Kent is the kind of personality that the players will connect with, that the community will connect with, and want to come support until the team is winning. I think that's one of the biggest challenges for coaches of struggling programs.
Yeah.
The new coaches that take over the struggling programs is convincing your fans to believe in you after some of the stuff they had been through in the years prior. So I think Ernie Kent will be able to do that and make a splash in Pullman.
Yeah, yeah. How long do you think coaches have on average now to turn a program around?
By year 3, you have to see some type of production in the win-loss column that you didn't see in the first 2 years.
Yeah.
Most contracts are around the 5-year mark when coaches first get hired.
Okay.
And athletic directors and fans are looking for a noticeable improvement by year 3, because by year 3, you're able to get some of your own players in. You're weeding through some of the players you inherited, and that's the time where there needs to be a change in the program. Now, if you're a coach that comes in year 1 and you have an outstanding year, kind of like Steve Alford at UCLA had last year, now you've sped up your clock. So now year 2 is expected to be better than year 2 was initially expected to be, and now by year 3, you better be really good.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things that can work in your favor from the standpoint of if you get ahead of the curve in terms of wins and losses, then maybe you get to your contract extension sooner.
Yeah.
But also to work against you where you better be winning in year 2, 3, and 4. And that's not always easy to do.
Yeah, yeah. Thinking about that, would you say that the mid-majors maybe give their coaches a little bit more time than the bigger programs, or would you say that's across the board?
Yeah, I think the mid-majors definitely do, and it's because they kind of have to. They don't have the luxury of firing a coach and replacing that coach, especially if it's a decent to good coach. Yeah. You don't have the luxury of firing him and replacing him with someone of his caliber all the time. Because if it's somebody who's better than the coach you're firing, especially at the mid-major level, that coach that you're trying to get now is probably going to the higher levels.
Yeah.
And he's probably got a high major program. And so, these coaches, these assistants who are looking to get jobs, these head coaches who know they're on the hot seat, they're really strategic with their movement. And they don't want to go to a program that they don't see as being on the road to continually improving their position in their career.
Yeah, yeah.
So mid-majors definitely have to be a little bit more careful when it comes to pulling the trigger on the hiring and firing. But I think that works to their advantage more than anything, because a lot of these coaches who do get fired early, it's not necessarily because they're bad coaches. And they may have a season where guys get injured and they win some games that they're supposed to get. They may miss out on one recruit who could have been a program changer, but if you give the guy a few more years, he might be able to get back in with, another recruit of that nature. And I'm a proponent of, if you find a good coach, you can't just judge him just strictly on the wins and losses.
Yeah.
I know that's very important, and I know especially when you're talking about a fan base, they want to see wins, but you really have to diagnose what's going on so that you don't get rid of a coach who, had you kept around an extra year or two, possibly could have got to the NCAA tournament.
Right, right. Does it play into it? I know the wins and losses is a big thing, but what about building character, working in the community? Do those
Yeah.
things go out the window?
Well, yeah. Unfortunately, and this is really big for me, Anthony, because what I do with my youth organization,
Yeah.
the other side of basketball, we set it up to teach kids those kind of things and to understand that you're not bigger than your sport, and we don't care how talented you are. There's a certain way you need to conduct yourself, and that's what I'm big on. But as you know, far too often that goes out the window once kids get older, and now we're talking about guys' jobs being on the line,
Yeah.
money, bonuses,
Yeah.
and those kind of things. And it's tough for a coach to enforce those type of character expectations when the coach isn't abiding by himself.
Yeah.
And far too often, that's what you see is coaches doing a job on the financial side,
Yeah.
but not on that character and development side, the way that they need to.
Right.
And hey, I'm not one to judge against these coaches because I haven't sat in their seat. Some could argue, hey, when your $1.2 million contract and your $30,000 bonus is on the line, let's see you make a character decision. And I could believe all day that I know what decision I'll make, but they have a point. Until you get to that situation, it's tough to judge.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a tough one because I really could go on and on about that, and I think it is definitely one of the biggest things that some people need to take more of a stand on, and there are coaches who are. So let's get that clear. There are coaches who are abiding by that, and I think that needs to be magnified more. I think we need to spend as much time, even as reporters, as analysts, as media, to highlight the good being done, even more so than the bad. And I know that's not the world we live in, but it will never become the world we live in until somebody steps up and starts making some changes.
Yeah, definitely. Well, let's skip to the NBA, and preseason games are happening. What stories or moves, trades? there's an obvious one, but stand out for you this year?
Well, before yesterday, the story that would have stood out the most, and maybe still does, is LeBron James going back to Cleveland.
Yeah.
I was a person who never thought he should have left Cleveland in the first place.
Okay.
I think what LeBron realized is it's going to be hard to win as many championships in Miami. It's going to be harder than he may. I don't want to say than he may have thought because I'm sure he thought it was going to be difficult, but you could see the end of the road. And I think he saw the end of the road in Miami sooner than he thought he would see it.
Okay.
And I think he came to the realization that even if I do win 5 rings here, I'm still not going to be known as the greatest basketball player. Because that doesn't do it. I have to win like 8 or 9 to start being in that conversation. And I think he saw like that's not going to happen. And he realized going back home to Cleveland and just winning 1 championship would be the equivalent of winning 3 in Miami.
Right.
And so I think that's why he made that decision. And similar to what we were talking about with the whole college coaches and, abiding by character rules. And unless you're in LeBron's situation, it's tough to judge that guy. You don't know a lot of the pressures he was facing and all the things he goes through. So it's easy for me to say I don't think he should ever have left Cleveland. But he made a decision that he felt was best for he and his family. So that's going to be something that everybody wants to watch this year, seeing if Cleveland wins a championship. I think they have a chance to win the East. I don't know about winning the whole championship, especially if the Spurs are healthy and as hungry as they were last year. I just don't really see the guys losing too much. But now the story is Kobe Bryant being rated the 40th best player by ESPN in the NBA.
Okay. So
that news broke yesterday, and it's been a big deal. And Kobe responded back and said that all the ESPN guys are a bunch of idiots.
Okay.
And he's going to use it as motivation to prove them all wrong. But, this is a story to me because, I don't know if you know, but I'm one of the biggest Kobe fans there is,
Right.
just in terms of his craft and his art. Um, you know, Kobe doesn't look the same way that he used to look. So as crazy as that statement sounds, that Kobe Bryant is the 40th best player, it has a bit of merit to it. Because you could go through some teams and name multiple guys on certain teams that you would say, you know, at this point today, I would take this guy on my team over Kobe Bryant. You look at the Clippers, you could say, I'll take Chris Paul, I'll take Blake Griffin before I take Kobe Bryant. You look at the Portland Trailblazers, I'll take Damian Lillard, I'll take LaMarcus Aldridge before I take Kobe Bryant. You look at the Golden State Warriors, I'll take Stephen Curry, I'll take Klay Thompson right now before I take Kobe. So, you know, and you can go down a list with several teams and do that. Now, I don't know that Kobe's necessarily 40, but I do think he's after number 20. I think you could easily name 20 guys that, again, not including Kobe's reputation, just including where Kobe is right now. I think there's 20 guys that are ahead of him. So I just want to see Kobe go out and prove them all wrong. I want him to prove me wrong. I want to see Kobe be a top 10 player. I just don't know if he has it in him to do it.
Well, you can slide down the list very quickly. You have a couple of injury-riddled seasons. You miss some games. Your team doesn't make the playoffs, and that's it. You know, people saying you're done, and that happened with Dwayne Wade. I remember a lot of conversation about him, and you know, Kobe's there now.
Well, you know what it is too. It's the eye test. It's after those injuries. When you come back, how do you look? Are you getting your shot off easily? Are guys who couldn't defend you 3-4 years ago able to keep you in front of them now? Are your shots being contested? Can you defend certain guys? And for Kobe, and this happened to Dwayne Wade too, you could just see that they were a step slower, and the game just didn't look as easy as it did before. Now they'll talk, especially Kobe. He'll talk like the game is still easy for him. But it's just not as easy as it used to be.
Well, I got to watch. I haven't watched all of it yet because it's recorded. The Cleveland Heat game that's played in Brazil, and just watching Dwayne Wade, it looked like, okay, LeBron's gone now. My role has changed, and I saw him doing some things out there that I felt like I hadn't seen him do for a while. So I'm looking forward to seeing how Miami do this year.
Yeah, the word on Dwayne was that he was feeling a lot better with his knee now, and I think he and Chris Bosh are going to be motivated because, look, these guys have been hearing for the last 4 years or however long it was LeBron was there that it's now LeBron's team, that maybe without LeBron they don't win those championships. And, you know, those guys have egos, especially if you're Dwayne Wade. You're taking a step back and saying, wait a minute, I won a championship before LeBron got here. He had to come join me. I didn't join him. So I think Dwayne Wade has some stuff he wants to prove, as well as Chris Bosh, who just signed a huge contract, which will make him the highest paid player in the league this year. Those guys feel like they have something to prove. So that's another interesting storyline. I think aside from LeBron in 2010 leaving Cleveland to go to Miami, this year is the most anticipated NBA season that I can remember. I'd say at least in the last 10 years or so.
Yeah, definitely. Now, something else I wanted to speak with you about is there have been a lot of stories this year from, you know, different sports, and definitely when the NFL has the off season, you know, sometimes you just cringing and hoping that something's not going to happen. Obviously there were, but what stories have you paid attention to this year that have really, positive or negative, stuck with you?
Well, the Ray Rice situation in the NFL was one that I paid attention to, as well as I think most of the sports fans, and even just people who just have an interest in human rights around the country and around the world. I think they all paid attention to it. And again, going back to what we were talking about with the college coaches and making character-based decisions, and going back to, you know, what I do with our youth here in the Portland, Oregon area, while watching that case, I was really disappointed. I mean, it's still ongoing, all the matters of the case, but by just watching how things were handled, and we have to keep in mind here, I don't know every detail involved in the situation, just like you don't, and a lot of people, a lot of analysts who you hear talk about this, we don't know every detail.
Yeah.
But the thing that disappointed me the most is people in high positions had a chance to set a precedent for what would be considered right and what would be considered wrong, and it wasn't done.
Yeah.
And going back to, we don't know the details, we don't know the legal ramifications of certain decisions that might have been made by a higher power.
Yeah.
You know, you have to abide by certain league rules. You know, I consider all of that stuff, but I also know that I have a contract right now with the Pac-12 Network.
Yeah. And
if they wanted to get rid of me, they would technically have to have a basis for it.
Right.
But also in that contract, it says they can do that without cause. So if they ever just woke up one morning and said, we just don't want Lamar Hurd a part of us anymore, they can make that decision. So when you do have cause to make a decision of right and wrong, and I mean clear cause, I just think the people in higher powers have to use that power to influence the world. I mean, that's just really how I look at it.
Definitely.
I have a bit of limited power with what I do, and I check myself all the time and ask, what am I doing to influence all these kids that I'm working with every day?
Yeah.
And if I don't feel like I'm doing enough, and I'm going back to the drawing board and I'm saying, okay, here's what I need to do different, and I'm making the change right away. So for me, that was the most disappointing part, in the fact that there was a different response once the video was shown publicly.
Yeah.
To the world. Once it got out, then things switched up, and there's just so much I could really go in about this quite a bit, but trying to be considerate and respectful as much as possible of the fact that I don't know all the details. Just in general, the thing that was most disappointing to me was that I don't feel in a situation where a very, very high power had a chance to set a standard.
Yeah.
I don't feel like that was done.
Yeah. The thing that amazes me is that with Ray Rice's story and Adrian Peterson, the stories just seem to keep going. Just as you think, okay, we've got to that point now where this is everything, we know what's gone on. Oh, and there's this, and
No, you're right. It is. It's ongoing. And some of that is because you have to be respectful of the due process of the legal system.
Yeah.
So, you can't just come in maybe and convict a guy of a certain thing and sentence him to something. I mean, I'm not even sure that's necessarily what everybody's looking for. I think what people were looking for was a firm decision of, this is our standard, and it doesn't comply with our standards, so you're not a part of us.
Yeah.
So when the Ravens kicked him off the team, that's what people were looking for from the get-go.
Yeah.
Not a 2-game suspension. A lot of details, man. A lot of details.
Yeah.
And at this point, we just have to hope that from here on out, the powers that have control over the situation make what's the right decision, just based, again, on just your moral compass, human rights, and how we need to proceed, not only as a country, but as a world going forward.
Definitely. Well, Lamar, thank you. It's always a pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, you too, man. I missed our chat.
Yeah.
I look forward to staying in touch throughout the season.
Yeah, definitely, and I'm looking forward to seeing how the season goes. And
it'll be an interesting one. It really will be. You hear guys say that a lot at the start of every season, but there have been some seasons where I I flat out tell you, I don't think this is going to be an interesting basketball season.
Yeah.
But I think for a lot of the reasons we talked about throughout this conversation, this one will be.
Oh yeah, yeah. And just going back, before we finish up, it's one of those things. The playing ground these days is so even,
It is.
and the facilities and recruiting and players, I think, being willing to travel further than why should I stay in my home state? When I can go.
Yep.
You know.
Yep. Exactly. No, it's all happening, and like you said, it's making the playing ground a little more even, and that's resulted in a lot more competitive games.